Hello everybody, we're here today, you're watching Irikoze on YouTube, and we're here today to talk about David Coffin, who you see there, and Scott Davis, who you see there, and also the dishonest nature of Megan Bruton, who you saw there. This is a wholly circumstantial case that hinges on the fact that Megan manipulated the situation, and Scott may very well be innocent. So we're going to go over some of those things here today and in videos to come. Hello there everybody. Okay, quick video today before I talk about the state's response to Kathleen Zellner about the bones from the quarry. Quick little talk about Scott Davis here. So, pretty exciting news today in the Scott Davis case, folks. Scott Davis has been granted oral arguments with the 11th Circuit Court. That's the federal court. So that's the 11th Circuit serves Georgia. That's where Scott Davis is. So he has been granted oral arguments. This is stellar news. This is great news because, you know, Scott's been struggling for a long time to get his case heard, and now he's finally getting there. He was previously in front of a habeas judge at the federal court, but at the federal district court, and that judge didn't like overturn his conviction or anything, but she did see something there, so she gave him another appeal. Basically, she basically said, you know, you need to go ahead and develop your evidence further. You need to just develop your evidence a bit further, and then, you know, or whatever, basically. But she wanted to give him the opportunity because she was seeing some things there that gave her cause for concern. So she gave, you know, Scott another. He's now using this appeal. He's now in the federal courts, and he's at the 11th Circuit, like I said, and they're granting the oral argument. So that's awesome. That means that his lawyer is going to get in there. They're going to be able to talk about this. That means that the judges are actually considering his case, which is another really, really good sign that this is really good news for Scott. At least it's going to give him another chance to have his voice heard. Because you guys know, man, I mean, I have some serious issues with the Scott Davis case. I mean, those of you who have been watching some of my videos for a while, you know. I mean, there's it was originally 72 pieces of evidence that go missing, right? But by the time trial begins, they had found 22 of them, so it was only 50 pieces of evidence going missing. Does that make you feel better? Only 50? Yeah, me neither. Anyways, so among those 50 pieces of evidence, we've got what basically the law enforcement believed to be the killer's blood. Didn't match Scott. What law enforcement believed to be the killer's prints, which were lifted off of the Porsche, the victim's Porsche, which burned. So neither of those two things match Scott. And oh wow, imagine that. They end up being part of the 50 pieces of evidence that go missing when they come back 10 years later and try Scott for this crime. Okay? So, starting out, massive amount of missing evidence that Scott's lawyers never get to see, look at, or ever, you know, analyze in any way. And they get, I mean, they have nothing that they can do in terms of that. But the state gets to bring in all of their findings and all of the stuff from their experts when they tested all this stuff back in 1996 when the crime originally happened, because they didn't try Scott until 2005. Okay, so back in 1996 they did all this testing on all this stuff. For one, the blood didn't come back to Scott, the prints didn't come back to Scott, all this stuff that they tested back then, it come into court, right? All their findings, their ME, you know, all these things. I mean, Scott's lawyers had no chance to look at any of the evidence in this case and to come up with ways to talk about it and refute some of the things that the prosecution asserted, right? This missing evidence is a huge deal, but it's not the only thing. Okay, then we move on to the fact that part of the prosecution's theory is that somehow Scott left his work Tuesday, December 10th at 11:30 in the AM, so basically just before noon, right? So on Tuesday the 10th, just at about half an hour before noon, David Coffin's Porsche is set on fire. Okay? This place where it's set on fire is fair distance from Scott's work, and the prosecution claims that Scott left his work, drove over to where the Porsche was, burned it, and then drove back to work. Okay, there's a problem with that. Here's why. He has too many people at his office that saw him and can account for the fact that he was there. There's like the best window that the prosecution could find was about a 14-minute window. I think it was about 14 minutes, right? Well, that's not enough. It took 17 minutes. I'm going to put my drive time video below for you folks. It took 17 minutes for my friend Susan Sexton, friend of the channel, our resident artist here, and it took her about 17 minutes just to drive from Scott's office to the Porsche, and that doesn't even account for her descending from the 27th floor of the building that Scott used to work in. Okay? So it doesn't account for that time either. You see where I'm going, right? It's absolutely impossible that Scott could have set the Porsche on fire. So what did the prosecution say when the defense was arguing that, oh, he could have had an accomplice? He had an accomplice. That's it. They just throw it out there. They just throw that spaghetti at the wall, and it sticks. It's like unbelievable. They have no proof in any way of an accomplice. They have nothing to suggest an accomplice. It's literally spaghetti thrown at the wall and seeing if it sticks. So you have that. So basically, it's impossible for Scott to have been able to burn this Porsche. Like I said, video down below. The drive time video where my friend Susan drives it, and you can see it. Exactly how much time it takes. And like I said, it doesn't account for the time it would take Scott to descend from the 27th floor, get his car out of the parking structure, and then drive to the point. So it's interesting. I'll leave that below for you guys to go check out. So we've got the missing evidence. We've got the impossibility, of the drive time for Scott to be able to have burned the Porsche, as the prosecution suggests. Also proved recently by a show called Reasonable Doubt that it could not have been a timed fire. It could not have been. It couldn't have been like set up to burn like after he left or anything. There's no way that they could have done. It basically, it's been proven that this was just a splash and dash, they call it. Basically, somebody ran up, threw some gas, and threw a match, and that's it. There was no sophistication to the triggering of this fire on this Porsche. So that was proved by this show Reasonable Doubt recently. So we know that it's impossible that Scott set it up with some kind of a timing device to burn. Okay? These are important facts because these facts continue to undermine confidence in the verdict. You guys may have been, remember, you hear me say that a lot in the MPCR for Stephen Avery recently, right? You hear me say that a lot. The undermining confidence in the verdict, right? Okay. So, reoccurring theme. So that's the idea here with Scott, because he's on appeal. He's trying to overturn his case, and he's doing the same thing. So these are all things that add up. Okay, let's move on to Mr. Paul Howard. Okay. Mr. Paul Howard is a piece of work. He is the Fulton County DA. Okay, I don't like this guy. This guy is a piece of work. He has been, he's just not. He's said some really silly things. I mean, when it comes to Scott Davis case, I mean, there's a lot of just janky stuff going on in this case, but we'll talk about the interrogation tapes, right? Scott was interrogated by Detective Chambers and Detective Walker, the co-lead investigators on this case for the David Coffin murder. Okay, so these two detectives interrogated Scott. Okay, Scott has been saying ever since day one that there were two tapes of the interrogation. They had two machines going. Okay. If Paul Howard, the DA there in Fulton County, has denied it, completely denied it, emphatically denied it ever since. And so he's always said that there was only ever one tape. There was only ever one tape, and that Scott was a liar, basically, right? Well, recently, after Scott was in the federal court, and the judge gave him another appeal and stuff, they went out and got Detective Walker, because they had they had pretty much proven that there was two tapes, because they got an audio analyst to listen to the interrogation tape, and you can actually hear the other cassette deck in the recording on the tape of the tape that was, you know, produced for trial, basically the interrogation tape, the one that the Fulton County DA said they had. Well, when you listen to that tape, you can hear another tape deck, and you can hear a tape being ejected from it. So, you know, that's an interesting thing. So, right, so if you can, and you know, most of you who are old enough to remember them, cassette tapes make a very distinctive sound when they pop out of the machine, especially those old recorders, you know, because the little door would open quick and stuff, so the tape would like rattle, and it's like a very distinctive noise. You can't really, it's, I mean, very hard to mistake the noise of a cassette tape being popped out of one of these machines, but you can hear it on the one tape. So that was presented to the federal court, the first judge that heard Scott's case. And she basically said that she thinks that him and his lawyers need to develop some of the evidence a little further. They need to they need to move it along a little further to make it a little stronger. Well, they did. They went out and did that. They went out and found Detective Walker, the co-lead investigator, or co-lead detective on this case, and he signed the affidavit that he was the one who took 2 interrogation tapes and 2 sets of transcripts of the interrogation tapes, and that he took those personally and hand-delivered them to Joe Burford, who was the assistant district attorney in Fulton County at the time. So Paul Howard is our district attorney, and he's been emphatically stating ever since day one that there was only ever one tape, but now we have Detective Walker, who has signed the affidavit that makes it clear as day that there was 2, and that the state has been lying. The Fulton County DA's office has been lying for all these years, saying that there was only 1. So these are some of the problems going on with Scott's case. But this Paul Howard guy, he's something else, right? Okay, let me show you a little clip of Paul Howard. This is one of the reasons why I despise the guy so much, because there is so much wrong with this case. I mean, there's so much wrong with the Scott Davis case, and yet he is dumb enough to say something like this.
Do you feel that Scott Davis got a fair trial?
Without a doubt.
District Attorney Paul Howard insists Davis's rights weren't violated, and any evidence that was lost wasn't bad faith or intentional. But in a petition in federal court, Shine disputes that, pointing out an evidence room clerk admitted under oath that she lied on an affidavit about receiving the missing murder weapon, and that her superior told her to do so.
Is that not bad faith if someone lies on an affidavit and admits it under oath?
Jeff, I almost have to laugh when I hear that.
Okay, so that was Mr. Paul Howard. So you guys get kind of an inkling of why I don't like that guy. So we move on from these issues. So, like I said, we've already covered the missing evidence, the timing for the Porsche fire. There's no way Scott could have done it. There's just no way he didn't have the time to pull it off, like the prosecution said. Then we have the cassette tapes. You know, there being 2 interrogation tapes, the state and Paul Howard claiming that there's only ever been 1. And now we have the affidavit from Detective Walker clearly stating he delivered 2 tapes, 2 sets of transcripts to the Fulton County DA's office. So there's more and more. It just keeps falling out of line here. So as I said, undermining confidence in the verdict, right? Undermining confidence in it. And that's what's happening here. And then that brings us to Megan Lee Davis Bruton. Her name is now Bruton. She was Megan Lee Davis at the time, when she was married to Scott. And as their marriage was ending, she was dating David Coffin. That's a really big reason of how this all got pinned on Scott, because everybody just pinned it on him as the jealous husband who killed the competition, essentially, right? So that's kind of the whole theory of the prosecution. So we have Megan Lee, Davis Bruton, who was dating David Coffin at the time. Now, I'll tell you, all throughout the marriage, there's proof. Public records show from the investigations reports and things like that Megan was dating 3 other men, really. 2 men in New York, very wealthy men. One was a surgeon, a wealthy surgeon. The other one was like a millionaire or whatever. She would fly out to go see them occasionally. This is all during her marriage. This is the type of personality that Megan is. Okay, so she was never happy with Scott. Whatever, and she's ending the marriage and everything. So now she's dating David Coffin, and just think for a second. of this. I mean, she's thrown Scott aside. Okay, that's, you know, her husband, who she was married to, and she's hitching her wagon to David Coffin because she thinks he's the one, and she claims that she thinks he felt the same way. She claims all these things, but I don't really see it. I don't, because I know what David Coffin was really doing at the time, and you know, well, at least I know things he was doing at the time. And I'll tell you what, the very last phone call at his house was not to Megan. It wasn't to Megan. Okay, that is the very last phone call on his house phone, and it goes to the girl that he was pursuing at the time, this other girl that wasn't Megan. So, look, I could easily see this playing out as Megan, who suddenly realized she had hitched her wagon to a guy who was just, you know, a playboy, who wasn't looking to settle down yet, and I think upon realizing that and everything that she had already sacrificed because she thought David was the real deal, that she may have lost her mind and done something really stupid. And the reason why I say this is not just because, you know, David's last phone call was to another girl or whatever. No. I don't reason from there that she committed the murder. It works this way. Megan had knowledge she shouldn't have had. Okay? She knew that David Coffin had been shot in the head while his body was still burning in a fire. Okay? You understand the problem with that. That's a huge problem. How the hell does she know that? How could she? See, and then when you take that piece of information, and then you work backwards to try to explain how that event happens. And for me, the most logical explanation for that event is that Megan suddenly realized that hitching her wagon to David was not going to be all that she thought. And that may have unhinged her and caused her to pick up a gun and shoot David. Okay? He was shot in his own kitchen, and according to the prosecution, with one of his own guns. Okay? So, I mean, unless you believe that Scott Davis is going into David's house and finding David's guns and shooting David with his own guns. So you see some of the problems that creep in with this case and why it doesn't make sense. But when you take the fact that Megan knew that David had been shot while his body was still burning in a fire, right? And then you try to look at how that can get, how you explain that, and then you start to see other things like, you know, yeah, Scott wouldn't come in and know where to find David's gun and shoot him with his own gun, right? I mean, these are the things that pop up with the Scott Davis case. So it's absolutely phenomenal news. Great news that he was granted oral arguments with the 11th Circuit Court. They're coming up in May. I'm hoping I'm going to get the audio from them, just like we did with Brendan. I'm very, very much hoping I'm going to get that audio, and I'm going to be able to go through this case with you guys some. I'm really looking forward to it. So those oral arguments are going to be in May. Hopefully we'll be looking forward to getting our hands on those oral arguments, and we'll be able to really do some good discussion here about the Scott Davis case. So that's about it for today, folks. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.